Is there a doctor in the building? Good, because we have a lot of things to discuss as it relates to injuries and the Buffalo Bills today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome in. I'm very excited to be joined today by Kyle Trimble, who is a doctor of physical therapy. He runs bangedupbills.com. You can follow him on Twitter at bangedupbills. He normally joins me ahead of Bills games to talk about the injury situation and what's at stake for the players and if they can go or what they be dealing with. But we're not doing that. Obviously, there's not a Bills game to be played until September, but we do want to get together today to have a conversation about the many injury dynamics that exist for this Buffalo Bills team right now, including Joey Bosa and this calf deal. We got some new information on Dalton Kincaid and the things that he went through and where he's at right now. We've got some draft picks, including Deone Walker and this back injury. I want to get Kyle's thoughts on that, in addition to a fun couple of questions that were sent in to us about, the concentration of injuries on the defensive side of the football. And we got our first real opportunity to hear from the Bills' new strength and conditioning coach, Will Greenberg. So we're reflecting on all of that today, a loaded episode here for you today, joined by my guy, Dr. Kyle Trimble. Thanks for hopping in and having a, middle of the offseason conversation.
Thanks for having me on again, Joe. These conversations are necessary as OTAs continue to ramp back up, injuries occur, and then it seems like the offseason is always a time when we find out about injuries we knew it happened, but then we get the exact details and then updates on surgeries, rehab, and everything else that comes with that.
Yeah, Dalton Kincaid in his interview with Jay Skursky actually said, now that it's the offseason, I'm going to be completely transparent. It's like, okay, well, thank you. Now we can reflect on that. But I do want to start with what I think is the biggest story right now with the Bills and injuries, and that's Joey Bosa, a calf injury that is likely going to sideline him until training camp. Obviously, it's May. We need Joey Bosa to be sacking quarterbacks in December and January. That's a long time away, but given the guy's injury history, didn't want to hear about this right now. What do you think's going on? What's the approach? And, is this just going to be an all-year thing with Joey Bosa and injuries and crossing our fingers that he's going to be able to go?
I think we're going to cross our fingers, unfortunately. I mean, we knew going into this that he was an injury risk. He's played he's played, I think, 50% of the games over the last 3 seasons. He's only had 2 or 3 seasons where he's able to appear in every game, and there's been one other one where he's appeared in 14 plus. I think it was last year, but he still battled through a hip injury. He's just constantly beat up. I mean, he's a great player when he's healthy, but there's always something nagging him, and you got to wonder if he could fully get everything together, what could he do on the field? I mean, outside of the offensive or defensive rookie of the year, he hasn't really ever put together more than a few Pro Bowl seasons. So we know from Sean McDermott's press conference during the first day of OTAs that Bosa had suffered a calf injury during the OTA phase 2 workouts on May 22nd. So that was the last day workouts before they went off for Memorial Day break, and then came back for those Tuesday practices there. They had said that he's going to be out for the rest of spring practices and then should be ready to go for training camp. That alone does not tell us the severity of the injury, but historically they've shown that when there's a guy that's had some type of injury, they're going to be cautious to hold them out of those OTA practices and then mandatory minicamp, because that's just simply too small of a time frame to get a guy rehabbed and get him back up to go hard for 3 days and then you shut him down again for 6 weeks or whatever the time frame is. So it's more ill-timed from a injury standpoint, and then the time frame they have for the spring practices. The average time is 17 days for a guy to miss, and that's been pretty consistent what we've seen from different guys over the years. We had that rash of defensive tackle injuries with the calf injuries several years ago. So the timeline's pretty consistent with that. It doesn't make sense to try to rehab him, do 3 days of hard practice, and then hopefully he doesn't pop it again when he's going back out there and then trying to rehab all throughout the true off season. And what's funny is he's never had this injury before. I mean, he's had a lot of foot and ankle injuries. He's had groin injuries. He's had everything else, but never a calf injury. And most time, the previous calf injuries lead to other calf injuries, but other risk factors include lower extremity injuries, high BMI. I mean, he's a big guy. And the other, I think that's been the other one. And then improper warm up, but I mean, I assume those guys are warming up pretty good. So it's unfortunate. I'm going to read into this, hey, they're just being cautious. They should be. They had a game plan going in for him, and we'll just kind of see what things look like. Even if this is a high grade tear, he still has ample enough time to get rehabbed and get ready to hopefully avoid PUP. And the only way he goes on PUP for the training camp is if he has some type of setback. Like we have seen that before, but we knew this was coming. We thought we would kick it out to at least training camp at least a little bit, but I don't think it's a reflection on the training staff because he's the only one dealing with injury right now. I mean, that's 89 other guys that are not dealing with an injury, and only Joey Bosa. So it's unfortunate. We'll be watching it, but I expect him to be full go for training camp in late July.
I've been dialed in on the Bosas for a while. Obviously, both of those guys were big-time prospects, and you kind of understand their story a little bit. Their father played in the NFL, and it sounds like the Bosa family's all ball, and maybe the intent for those, Joey and Nick, their entire life was to play in the NFL, and probably a very accelerated training regiment. And those guys are yoked up, right? I mean, they're muscular dudes that are special athletes, and I talked to Jerry Ostrowski, who's doing the Bills squad show with us here on Locked On Bills, and he talks a lot about how those body beautiful guys, man, they just have a lot of soft tissue injuries. I mean, is that just the reality of it? Do you think that Joey's just been a guy that's been training for a lot of years, and he's very muscularly defined, and a consequence of that is just frequent injuries? Because we've kind of seen that from both him and Nick throughout their NFL careers. And it's not like people forget, like Joey Bosa is not 1,000 years old. He turns 30 in July, but he's had a long list of injuries for a guy that's about to turn 30 in July.
And I did read too, his dad, he's a first round NFL draft pick, I believe, with the Dolphins, and he had his career cut short because I think of a knee injury, but he also dealt with injuries. It might be a coincidence, but you got to wonder if that sport specific training for years and years to be ready for this stage, and then their body just can't handle it. I mean, we've heard how many times guys are multi-sport athletes and they are able to get their bodies ready to do different things, keeps them flexible, not necessarily yoked up all the time, and then that allows them to translate and do the things they need to do. I mean, Josh Allen, for example, I mean, granted, he's not a human, but he is a multi-sport athlete. He's been able to play through a lot of different things he shouldn't be playing through. But maybe if you do one sport constantly and get ready for that lift, and sometimes you lose the versatility that other sports give you, and then that can lead to other things like that. I'm sure the research shows you one way or another, but it seems like the multi-sport guys and the guys that aren't training for one particular activity all the time tend to do better from a health standpoint.
All right, so that's the Joey Bosa conversation. Coming up here in just a moment, we're going to talk Dalton Kincaid. There's some new information out there about what he dealt with last season. I'm excited to hear from Dr. Kyle Trimble on that. And then, of course, we're getting into the draft picks as well. So, folks, be sure to stick with us. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action, and FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Folks, you're watching these playoffs. They're exciting. Make them even more exciting by getting in on the action. If you have a feel for which teams are heating up, which players are heating up, there's prop bets available to you. There's same-game parlays available. There's the NHL playoffs. There's Major League Baseball. It's a lot of fun to get in on the action. And look, if you are new to FanDuel, it is the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. My guest today, Dr. Kyle Trimble of Banged Up Bills, and we are talking about the injury status of so many players on the team. And there's some new information out on Dalton Kincaid, courtesy of a Jay Skursky article with the Buffalo News. And Kyle, what'd you learn about Kincaid and what he went through last year? And then, of course, the bigger implication is, what do we need to be worried about moving forward?
So I read this article last night, getting takeout, and I got real excited when I saw there was new information about Dalton Kincaid. Give a brief recap. We knew he suffered a left PCL sprain against Colts in week 10, week 9, and that really hampered him the rest of the season. And then during the offseason when the locker cleanout was happening, Dawson Knox had said that Dalton Kincaid has suffered injuries to both those knees, and we never really knew what the other injury was. We saw that he was wearing a compression sleeve on his right knee at different times. You know, that whole hoopla about him being too skinny, and he had wraps on both knees during the phase 2 OTAs. And I always thought that maybe he just had maybe a small meniscus tear. He got scoped out and got cleaned up. And then Jay Skursky interviewed Dalton, and he was able to review some additional information. So Dalton had stated that he suffered a morae lavelle lesion. Now, I'm not great with French, but that's how Google tells me to pronounce it. So what this is basically the top layer of the skin shears off from the underlying fascia, the other muscle, other deeper layers of the tissue in that particular area where you get hit. This happens due to a direct blow to the particular body part, in this case, the knee. So basically what happens is he hit his right knee really hard, and the skin sheared over the other deeper layers of the tissues, and that can lead to a lot of swelling in there, and it kind of just leads to just not space, but this is something I had to Google and really better understand before I got in here. But you really just have the shearing of the tissue, and then swelling sets in, and it just kind of really leads to just a now well-defined area. We see this more with high impact injuries, such as like a fall, motor vehicle accident. Looking back, this is something I've seen before. I've just never seen that phrasing in the medical charts when I've done my chart reviews. You see it's more like for hip fractures, where they usually clean this stuff up here. They clean out that area, and then they go fix the repair, and then everything kind of just comes back up. So you see often bruising with this area. You see a lot of swelling. You see skin hypermobility. So it just looks very kind of, you lose that definition in that particular joint there. So the nice thing is he said he didn't have to have surgery. When you have larger lesions, then they have to go and clean it out. But in his case, they were able to use compression therapy, and that allowed him to kind of work through the injury, which is one of the primary reasons why you don't do surgery. You can do that compression instead. They can drain the knee. I'm sure he went through that at some point to help keep things in check there. But if that knee is blowing up on him constantly, and that swelling's gonna reduce the range of motion, that explains why he was having so much issues pushing off the right knee, and of course the left knee being unstable due to the PCL sprain. So he was beat up, and he has even said at one point he thought about shutting it down, or that the discussion was there, but he didn't know of anything else but to do that there. So this was not on my bingo card as possible mechanisms of injury. Or as a possibility for a diagnosis. And I had looked back, and you see injuries that happen, but you don't really ever pinpoint what could have been there. It looked like he injured his right knee back in week 16 against the New England Patriots. He fell real hard on his right knee. I believe he came out briefly and then came back in, but then we saw him with the right knee wrapped later on, in which we knew that there's two different injuries. So this is something that can happen again, but since the lesion was smaller, that didn't require surgery, there's less likelihood of it happening. There's like a 56% chance it can happen, according to the literature. But the Bills have been diligent about this. They've been trying to ramp him back up slowly. Really what I'm getting at is this was a really unique injury. It explains some of the things that we're missing before, and I'm glad that it wasn't worse that he required surgery. So I know everybody's worried about him moving forward with things, but the PCL should be good to go for training camp. The knee, as long as it doesn't take another drastic bad hit to the area, he should be okay. But they know how to manage this, to know things are happening. But he's had the rest and rehab to get ready. And I thank Jay for getting that interview done, because that really helps us better understand these injuries when they do happen and we don't get additional information.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot to deal with. They're late in the season.
Yep.
And obviously excited for Kincaid to be healthy entering 2025 and have the opportunity to fulfill the promise of that draft pick that got so many people excited about what he can mean for this offense moving forward. And this is a big year for him in Buffalo. Let's get in this draft class. Not all of the picks, but 3 of the top 4. There's some stuff to get into, and I do want to get into Deone Walker first. 4th-round pick out of Kentucky. Big dude. And a back injury was discovered at the NFL Scouting Combine. And what's really confusing to me about this entire situation is anyone would tell you that Deone Walker was not as effective in 2024 as he was in 2023. But he even made the comment that he had a hard time getting out of bed at times during the season. Yet the injury wasn't discovered until the combine, which is months after the season. So what can you say about this timeline, which I find to be very confusing? What is the injury, and what's like the overall implication of a massive dude like this with a back injury?
It is confusing because you would think that if he's dealing with a back injury and having that much trouble getting out of bed, you think that the training staff will be looking into things a little bit more. And maybe they did. I never want to crap on any training staff. I mean, they have their resources, they have their ability to look at things, and maybe it wasn't bad enough for them to really dig into it more. You don't know what their rationale was, but I know being at Kentucky, that's a big Division I program. They're going to have the resources to look into this. Maybe they did know about it, or, and they kind of just kept it hush hush. But the reason why I was found at the NFL Combine is because every offensive, defensive lineman have to go through a lumbar X-ray. That's the only mandatory imaging that a player has to go through. Everything else is kind of incidental, and they image something if there's a previous injury to check it out, or, hey, I have an ouchie here, let's check this out. But that's why they found it at the NFL Combine, because they have to go through that imaging. So what they found was called a pars defect, and that is a fracture of the pars anticularis of the vertebral arch. I know that's a lot of words.
Yeah, I totally know what that means for sure. Yeah.
So this part connects the vertebral body to the rest of the spine. So like you have the basically the circular area like on a vertebrae, and then you have the stuff that kind of spreads out, and you see the spinous processes, transverse processes, and everything else that kind of helps encompass the spinal cord, the cage, if you will. So where this breaks is it breaks off basically where part of that cage is at. Or there's a fracture or stress fracture in terms of Walker's case there. So there's a weakening in that area. And of course, this is right where that's normally the weakest area, regardless of a healthy person or non-healthy person here. So we see this happen more often with athletes who do a lot of jumping, a lot of hyperextension, defensive tackle blocking. You're always getting a back hyperextension, so a lot of stress there. This can be congenital, or it can be brought on through activities. I know on Bill's squad, Jerry Ostrowski talked about how he had the congenital version of that, and he was able to manage it. And it was kind of like they found it as a side thing. And he did say that one of his sons had to manage it and play through that, and the other one had to stop playing football because of it there. So thankfully, Walker was able to continue playing through that there. So this is something the Bills are going to have to manage. And with it being a stress fracture, they're going to want to make sure this thing heals back up. But this is something they manage throughout the time. Like, it's going to heal up from a functional standpoint. He's going to be able to live a normal life in terms of move around. But when you're playing NFL football and stressing that area constantly, they're going to have to keep a close eye on that to make sure that they have good strength in all the different core musculature, hip musculature. Make sure that if he's having any pain in the area, let's get on top of it first before we let it get to the point where he has to sit out for extended time. The Bills had a clear game plan when they were to go draft him, and Brandon Beane even said that he's a first-round draft pick, but this dropped him in the draft there. The research does show that guys that do typically have this diagnosis do drop in the draft for this exact reason, but the performance doesn't decline over the course of their career. They play a slightly less amount of games, play slightly less, start the games, but generally it's not a huge deal. It's one of those things like, yeah, it's going to knock you, but your performance still should be okay. The average career length is about 4 years. So, hey, if you get Walker out for a full, rookie contract and he's not paying out, you can move on from him. If it's a little bit shorter, okay, whatever. But I like the idea for drafting him in the 4th round, and you get a really great draft pick at a discount. We see them do that from time to time, but you don't want to take that discount in the 1st round if you don't have to. And then finally, it's suspected up to 50% of linemen have this. So it's a very common thing. We just don't hear about it a lot. There was only a few instances I could find where guys have this. There was a defensive tackle for the Cowboys who played like 2 games. Zach Mettenberger from LSU had this, and then of course Jerry had told us he had this there too. But this happens more than we know. It's underreported in the media, but the Bills know what they want to do dealing with this, and he's gonna be fine. There's gonna be times he's got an injury report. Might miss some games, but they have a good game plan, and I'm confident the Bills are going to be able to take care of him and not have it be a problematic thing where we see him have to retire early.
One of my observations in scouting Deone Walker, even before any information came out about the back injury, was just generally how he leverages, he hinges, he bends. And the buzz phrase that I always go to is I talk about how he's very upper body strength dominant, and he struggles to recruit his lower half, to use that to anchor, to leverage his hips and, really maximize on the body type and the power that you would think he would have for his size. And even in some of the video that came out from OTAs where they're showing TJ Sanders, the Bills' second-round pick, and Deone Walker working through some drills on the sled, you could just see a very different style from Sanders and Walker. And I'd expect that. They're drastically different body types. But even the way that Deone Walker gets into the power position to get into a stance to operate, you could see the way that he bends. He almost like folds at the waist, where you would expect, NFL defensive linemen to maybe be able to squat, right? Like reduce their glutes and get into a position in a more fluid way that's more able to bend and hinge and get into that power position as opposed to just kind of folding over. Is this tied to the back? Like, is this a symptom of that, or is that just, so I understand that some people are quad dominant, some people are hip dominant. Like, there's just different ways that people bend. I'm curious your thoughts on how this injury impacts that, or is that just kind of how, type of mover that he is?
That's a good question. Because we see that the hyperextension lead to stress on the area. So flexion should take pressure off that area, and he should want to flex forward there. But you would think you'd want to bend more at the knees to create leverage there, because there's a difference between bending at the back and then bending at the hips and knees. It's just drastically different how you move around and whatnot. You get more compact, create more leverage when you get down like that, what you're saying, versus bending over at the hips there. So that's a good question. I don't know that would necessarily lead to the back injury, lead to his style of play. He might have just adapted to that because of the back and say, hey, it's easier to bend over rather than try to get my legs underneath me. And if he was having some type of radiculopathy where the nerves were getting pinched and sending pain down the back of the legs, he might have just said, hey, it's easier to bend forward than trying to squat my already weak legs down, and you just kind of play that way. So I'm sure that the training staff is working on ways to help build his lower extremities, to build, to create more movement with his legs versus trying to do so much stuff with his back, and then protect the back so that he's not having any further instances of this, or at least to minimize the instances of that. So it's a great question. It's kind of the chicken or the egg approach there, but it might have just been he adapted because of the injury, and now they have to kind of remodel him to get him to better create leverage.
Bills' first-round pick, Maxwell Harsin out of Kentucky, the cornerback. He battled through a shoulder deal his last season at Kentucky, and the information that's come out about that has been pretty interesting. I'll let you phrase that, because medical terms and me not really the best. So what can you tell us about Maxwell Harsin?
This one's gonna be easy and short, thankfully. So what happened is he suffered an AC joint sprain against, I believe it was Ohio. Against Ohio, left a shoulder injury. He then went in to get a shoulder injection, which numbs up the area. This is very, very common that they do. It's one of those things that helped him get through the game. And then what happened was that needle that they injected him with was, I don't know that it was dirty, but it caused an infection. So he actually had to be hospitalized for a little bit. And of course, when you have infection regions through your body, it's a systemic thing, and it's going to make him feel awful, and he's going to have to get antibiotics to get better. So it wasn't a quick thing that you're going to put a Band-Aid on, some Neosporin, and get back out there. He had to get on antibiotics, make sure that cleared the system. And then he ended up missing 5 games for that. And then even when he did come back, he still wasn't 100%, not because of the AC joint sprain, which I have zero concern about moving forward. It was just, I'm sure that shoulder is still tender. He had to get kind of calloused back up. And then I don't know which side, the injury happened to, but there were some issues with his tackling, which was brought up on tape there. So the infection's cleared. It's a thing that can happen. It's a pretty rare thing, but we saw the thing with Tyrod Taylor get injected for his ribs.
So I was thinking about while you were talking, that Tyrod Taylor thing. Yeah.
So like these things do happen. They don't happen often, but it's just unfortunate that really affected a lot of his final season. So zero concerns moving forward with injuries, with his AC joint sprain. It just kind of, these things happen, and I'm glad that he at least got trained, the medical staff to take care of him, and really zero concern moving forward with them.
I want to ask you about one more draft pick. That's Landon Jackson, the Bills' third-round pick, a defensive end out of Arkansas. Couple of ACL injuries, ankle fracture as well. It's been a while. He's pretty far removed from that stuff, but some significant injuries in his past. What are you worried about there?
Just ability to stay healthy long term. I mean, he's been doing better over the recent years. Just to recap real quick, 2018, their sophomore year, left ACL tear, senior season, ankle fracture. And then going into LSU, he battled the ankle injury or re-injured it at some point, and then he retore the ACL during his freshman year at LSU. That took me some time to dig through that stuff. I'd found a TikTok video of all things to find that, but I was glad I found it. And then he suffered another ankle injury, some other undisclosed stuff. And then he suffered a neck injury against Missouri his final year that had him go to the hospital for further evaluation, which is standard protocol. But then you get worried about, is there some type of stenosis underlying there? Is a herniated disc? Obviously, he was checked out at the NFL Combine. He did drop a little bit for other reasons to the third round, because there's talks that he's maybe a first or late first or second round pick there. So he was a Bills guy through and through. Him being drafted in the third round fit what the Bills do every year. They avoid a lot of injury risk in the first round, second round, and then they take a swing at a guy who has immense talent but has some injury concerns in the third round, and then it's kind of just go whatever they want to find in the fourth or seventh rounds and the undrafted guys. So it was just funny how it's like, yep, this guy would be perfect in the third round. And that's what it was. So as long as he takes care of his body, I mean, he got better throughout his time and growing into his body. I just hope that there's no more lower extremity injuries that would sideline him with the ACLs and the ankle fractures.
All right, so good information there on the Bills draft picks. We had a great question sent in about the Bills, and do they really have a higher concentration of injuries on the defensive side of the football than other teams? We're going to explore that, in addition to some thoughts on Will Greenberg, the Bills' new strength and conditioning coach. Got a chance to hear from him for the first time. So we'll break that down here for you on the other side of it. Folks, be sure to stick with us. Welcome back. My guest today, Dr. Kyle Trimble of Banged Up Bills. A few more topics we want to get into today, including a question that was sent in, wanting some feedback from Kyle on the Bills and defensive injuries. And the Bills have had, feels like a lot, right? There was only 2 starters last year that didn't miss at least one game due to injury on defense last year. And the question is, is there something about that for the Bills, that there's more injuries on defense stylistically, the way that they play, anything maybe in terms of how they're managing their personnel? What did you learn? I know that you spent a lot of time kind of researching this. Do the Bills have more injuries on defense, and is there a reason for it?
Yes and no. I mean, thankfully, when we got this question, already had some data, and then I built off of that there. It's really interesting going back throughout the years. And once again, I started back in 2017. You go back through the time, it's ebbed and flowed throughout the time. So it used to be more injuries on offense. And then around 2020, 2021, it was even. And then it's trended a little bit more toward the defense in the past few years. And I think that's more perception. I mean, there is more defensive injuries, but has that really affected us too much? I mean, we've made the AFC title game, divisional round. I mean, we still played very well despite all the injuries there. So I went and looked this a little bit more. Aaron Schatz, who was with Football Outsiders for years and years, and then he went over to, I think it's Fade the Noise Fantasy. He still does the stuff where it's called adjusted games lost. So this doesn't look at just the total injuries. It accounts for both absent players and those playing at less than 100%. And it gives more weight to injuries to expected starters and situational players than to expected backups. I don't really know the formula that goes into that, how they weight that stuff there, but the Bills come out pretty good. I mean, overall here. So looking at the 2024 injuries, they were 8th overall. And they had the third least amount of injuries on offense in the entire league, and then the 21st most injuries on defense. So they were, they had more defensive injuries this year than offensive injuries, but they were still eighth overall healthiest team, compared to the other teams in the league there. So 2023, they were 13th or 14th based off the data there, and then 2022 or 13th. So they've always been the top of the league. And then, not to belabor the point too much, they were the least injured team from 2018 2022 at 53.9 AGLs. And then through a 12-year period, 2010 to 2022, they were fifth overall. And, while you look at the injuries, it's all just a number. I mean, Detroit led the league overall this year with 86.5 average game or adjusted games lost, and they still made the divisional round. They're close to make the NFC Championship game. So, the injuries do play part into that, and eventually you start petering out because you start losing too many guys, like what we saw with Detroit. But you got guys like Philly, their second healthiest team. They won the Super Bowl. Baltimore, they were real close to making the AFC title game. They were the healthiest team. I mean, it's a lot of luck. A lot of how you develop your backups, how you get guys ready, and it does play part in losing the games, but it's not everything. So yes, the Bills have had more defensive injuries, but they're still far healthier than most of the teams in the league. And even that time frame from 2010 2022, there's only one time where they went over 100 adjusted games lost. Most of the time they were still more healthy than most of the other teams in the league there. So it is true, but it's a lot better looking when you compare it to the rest of the league.
Yeah, it's always good to have a feel for the rest of the league. We're so hyper-focused on the Bills and what's going on, and you feel like things could be more or less than what's normal. And in the reality, when you you zoom out a little bit, you can see that it's not quite as drastic as maybe it feels. We had another question that was sent in, and here it is. It says, I've heard you are Dr. Kyle Trimble, and Joe Marino talk about players callousing up before playing well, or at least at a league level. I feel like we all kind of know what that means, but is there any way that you can quantify it? Is there any evidence or data that suggests how it may work on a psychological level?
It's definitely not a straightforward answer. The players are expected to come to camp, be ready to go, and they do have to pass a conditioning test. So that is kind of a quantifiable aspect of that. If they can pass the conditioning test and they pass the physical, then they're ready to go to play NFL football. So we've seen examples over the years where guys take some time to get, past the conditioning test. I think the most glaring one was Albert Haynesworth years ago. He just could not pass I think it was the Redskins conditioning test, or whoever it was he was playing for. Some of them ones are a little more grueling than others. Ravens are known to have one of the more difficult conditioning tests. They're supposed to run 900 yards and 6 legs, and then you can go Google online how that all breaks down, and they have different metrics for if you're offensive line, defensive line, safety, running back, things like that there. And then the Jets have a different one. So the Bills have their own specific conditioning test they know they need to get guys ready for. So you have to kind of hit certain basic benchmarks. And then we know they use the catapult system to track their workloads, and that's the sports bra thing that they use. So they can always track to see if they're doing too much work, if they're not doing enough, and they can kind of modulate that there. So that helps them slowly ramp up. And then the NFL, I believe the CBA put it in where they have to have a ramp up period where they're not going to go 2 days pads, the first day of practice there for training camp. They have to ramp up doing shells, and then they can ramp up the time frame like in 15-minute increments. So they have a game plan to get these guys worked up to the point, even though they come in shape, that they can get up to a appropriate level, so they're not going to have problems with injuries or overworking themselves initially. So that's all part of the callousing up process. And then I tried to quantify how long the callousing up process takes. I mean, training camp's 6 or 7 weeks there. We're seeing guys need probably about 3 or 4 weeks to really get ready. And I kind of qualified that from a standpoint of, you see the injured reserve designated to return time frame of 3 weeks there, and then we see guys needing about 3 or 4 weeks to get ready for the first preseason game. And then the final point with that is, I've watched the guys that come off of IR or start on PUP. If they're not activated by mid-October, or not mid-October, mid-August, they're usually held out. Like, they're not activating guys at the very, very end there. So it's like that delineation point where, hey, if you're not activated to begin practicing by mid-August, we're just going to shove you until you're ready there. I thought they were going to do that with Tre'Davious White a few years ago with his ACL, and they kept him on for longer. Obviously, he was out for other reasons, but it usually takes a good 3 or 4 weeks for guys to get ready. And I liken it back to my own experiences doing different sports in high school and in college. You might come into shape, whether you're playing football or cross country or wrestling, whatever else there, you might have been in shape from a cardiovascular standpoint, but you still had to do that particular activity and get yourself ready. So whether it's taking the hits or doing the high intensity activities or whatever it was, you had to adapt your body to that particular sport there. So that's kind of more the counseling process. I couldn't find anything more specific as to how that would be, but it's a time frame aspect, and just to get into the actual sport and make sure they're not ramp up too quickly, which would cause injuries, and then leave Bills Mafia to go absolutely crazy when so and so is out for the next 3 weeks.
The last thing I wanted to get into with you today is the Bills' new strength and conditioning coach, Will Greenberg, replacing Eric Ciano, who held the job for a long time. And Will Greenberg was on the Centered on Buffalo podcast with Eric Wood on Thursday, May 29th. Both you and I have had a chance to listen to it, and we would encourage anyone to go and listen to it. It's very insightful, and Eric's interviews are always really good. So check out all of the episodes, but especially this one with Will Greenberg. I'm curious for you, just kind of open up, go wherever you want to go with this. What kind of stood out to you from listening to Coach Greenberg?
Like Joe said, make sure you go listen to it. The first thing I heard when I listened to Will talk with Eric, I mean, Eric gets great guest time. He has that inside access there, but Will is incredibly intelligent. You hear immediately why the Bills wanted us to change things up and keep him on board, and he had new ideas bringing in. His stuff was talking about bringing more technology in terms of monitoring guys and communication, and he was talking about how he wanted to make sure that everybody in the building was on the same page. So that was nutrition. He has a master's in nutrition. The dietitian that they have, they want to make sure that the performance staff is in place, that they all have the same goals. They're making sure that the medical staff, the ATs, the PTs, guys like that, to help them keep them guys going. And then they're really hyper-focused on making sure they have different programs going out once for the guys. They have brought in iPads to track how much the bar is moving, how much weight guys are putting up, their workload, so they're not overdoing it, which is why I don't think we're seeing more injuries like we talked about with Joey Bosa earlier in the show. They're also identifying programs for position-specific activities. So they're not just saying, hey, here cookie cutter approach like you got in high school and go out and do it there. They're really modifying things to what the positional demands are so that you guys are ready to go. Like I said, it was a great thing. And then even toward the end, Eric talked about what can you do to prevent the soft tissue injuries. And, Will came out and said, yeah, it's a sport. It's violent. He said, I'm quoting him here, there's a lot of unknown factors, unknowable factors. There are patterns, though, then when you guys have soft tissue injuries, what time of year or what the common theme is, and then, how they are trying to address it and better manage it there. So they try to mitigate the risks by understanding what the previous injuries were, but where everybody's loaded on the field is and what they're doing in the weight room. And then they're still always asking how they're feeling. So like I said, he talks about all this stuff there. They're trying to plan against it. And then there's one quote I really like there. And, there's something that's interesting about it is like, you can never tell anyone how many injuries you've prevented. You only see the ones that have happened. So, it's a lot like insurance. You want to mitigate risk as much as possible. I fully believe that's what they're trying to do. I mean, maybe that's why they wanted to try to change things up, going from Ciano, who had been there a long time, to try to change things up and get a fresh set of eyes in there for Greenberg, who's been there for a while, but he'll be in charge of his own thing. So there's a lot more they talk about, but that was really the big things. And I made sure I listened to that driving around Buffalo here today. So it was a great show, well worth a listen, but you can really tell they have a clear game plan. And we talked about earlier with the other injuries, they're doing a much better job at mitigating those injuries than some of the teams in the league. So, let's put our trust in Will Greenberg and the training staff and Nate Bresky and everybody else, and hopefully they can get through the 2025 season without too many injuries.
Dr. Kyle Trimble coming on, sharing the expertise, breaking this stuff down far better than I can. I do not. I just, when it's injury stuff, I mean, I've learned a lot of things, but I know my lane. And I appreciate you coming into this lane for me to bridge the gap and make sure that we are giving Bills Mafia the best information possible, breaking down injuries, which are unfortunately a part of football, right? What do they say? The injury risk in football is 100%. And therefore, there's a big place for you to join these conversations. And I certainly appreciate you giving us your time and your expertise and educating us on what's going on with this football team that we all love.
Absolutely, Joe. I love talking to you, but the less we have to talk, that usually means a better thing for the Bills team.
I mean, listen, I think they're in pretty good shape. I know this Bosa thing is annoying, but that's really it, right? I mean, Deone Walker's working through this back deal, but there's been times where the Bills have opened up OTAs, and the list is of guys that are still working through off-season surgeries. You're like, what is going on? It's really not the case. I mean, it's Bosa and that's it. That'll change, right? It's going to change, but I think they're in a pretty good position right now.
Absolutely. I mean, less for me to talk about, the better, and just we'll wait for real football to get here very soon.
All right. Well, Dr. Kyle Trimble, we appreciate you being here. We appreciate the listeners for tuning in. And as always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.